Uh, Good evening. Good evening. Oh, don't go too far. Good evening. Welcome to the Newark Zoning and Land Use Regulations Community Meeting in the Central Ward. I'm Allison Ladd, the Deputy Mayor for Economic and Housing Development here in the City of Newark for Mayor Raj J. Baraka. It's great to see everybody here at Central High School. Thanks so much for coming out. I know some of you we've seen at some of the other ward meetings, and it's great to see you again. So welcome. Tonight, we will be having our, again, Central Ward discussion around the Newark Zoning and Land Use Regulation proposed changes. We have with us, as we get started, we have our Council President and Central Ward Council Member, LaMonica McIver, who's here. Thank you, Council President, for coming tonight and also for your leadership throughout this process and ensuring that we have community engagement. Also, our at-large Council Member, Larry Crump. Councilmember Crump. Thank you, Councilmember, as well. I know I've seen you at a few of our meetings throughout the city, and grateful to have you here tonight as well, so thank you. And really glad, again, to be here. I know those that have heard us talk a little bit about it, what you're going to hear tonight is you're going to hear from Pallavi Shinde, our Director of Planning and Zoning for the City of Newark. She's going to talk with you about the existing conditions as well as the proposed changes based upon the land use and zoning regulations that are currently being prepared to go through City Council approval. We are taking all of your feedback, and we'll talk a little bit more about where we go with next steps. But at this point, I want to turn it over to Pallavi Shinde, who's going to walk you through the presentation tonight, and then we'll have questions and answers after she completes the presentation. But thanks again for coming.
Thank you, Allison. All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome. If you all know, this is the last presentation of a series of presentations that we have been having. We have had these presentations in every single ward, and in every single ward, the presentation has been centered on and has been very specific to the changes that the proposed zoning ordinance will bring into that neighborhood. So this evening, we will be focusing on the Central Ward. And the format has been the same with every single presentation. I go through a series of slides showing you the existing zoning in this ward and in these neighborhoods. I show you some of the existing conditions that are there, and how can zoning or land use change these conditions. So we can just get started. All right. Okay, so this is the existing zoning for the Central Ward. What you're going to see is a bunch of colors here, and then we have a legend here that shows you what the colors mean, right? And you have your handouts to go along if it's too hard to see, because I know the text is a little smaller. But what you have here is the yellow swatches, right? Shades of yellow, lighter to darker. Those are your residential zones. And in Newark, we have, starting with R1, which is the one family, it goes on R2, R3, R4, R5, and R6. So essentially, the density increases. You go with one family in your R1 zone, and it keeps going on to 2 family, 3 family, 4 family, and it goes on. The next color that you could focus on is your commercial zone, which is essentially your C1, C2, and C3 zones. These are zones that allow for retail uses or commercial uses on the ground floor and commercial or residential uses on the floor above. So again, with the lighter red, you have less intense uses and less density, and as the color gets darker up till the C3 zone, the density and intensity of uses increases. There's also certain building standards that go with it, and I can talk about that a little later in the slides. And again, we just want to focus on the colors in the Central Ward. So in the Central Ward, the other color that you're going to notice is the color blue. That's very specific to the Central Ward. What that is it's institutional zoning. So you all know there's a lot of colleges, educational institutes in this zone. or in this ward. So that color is blue, and that is your institutional zoning. It just has a different building standards that go with this kind of zoning, but you do want to focus on that color as well. I don't see any pink here in the ward, so I'll keep moving forward. The other color that I'm going to mention is because we are changing certain building standards for this zone. That is your MX1 and your MX2 zone. So what MX is it's mixed use. And again, with your 1, which is your light orange, the density and intensity is less than the MX2. And I'll talk about the standards in terms of the number of stories that you can build. But moving along. Okay, so the other thing that I point out in every single ward is the redevelopment plan, right? You have your citywide zoning. If you go on your Newark zoning map, you can Google it Newark zoning, and the first link that comes up is a Newark zoning map. So you have citywide zoning, which has a bunch of colors, red, yellow, purple, but then you will see some areas that are gray and have a red boundary around them. Those are the redevelopment plans. So there's 3 redevelopment plans that we will be folding into the citywide zoning, and there's the rest that we will not be changing. If you look here, I think you can see the numbers here on the slide, and then you also have your handout. But in the central ward, you have a total of 7 redevelopment plans. No other ward has that many, so Central Ward has 7 redevelopment plans. And I have pretty much denoted the location on the Central Ward, so you have your number key, and then you have the names of the redevelopment plans. I'll just read them out to you. So the first is the Ken Brenner, which you see denoted by number 1 here. The second is the First was Ken Brenner Springfield redevelopment plan. Second is the Old Third Ward. And I wanted to mention that of these, the first 2 are the ones that will be folded into the citywide zoning. So you have these redevelopment plans now. They have been there for a really long time, and we will be folding them into the citywide zoning. The next is your Lincoln Park. 4th is Living Downtown, Downtown Core, Broad Street Station, Newark Riverfront, and Public Access. So the last 4 are in close proximity of each other, and those actually form the redevelopment plans for the downtown neighborhood. And I have a slide to follow. Okay, so this is just a little snapshot of what the redevelopment plans look like. It's difficult to go through all the standards for the redevelopment plan, but I wanted to share that with you, and you have your handout, if you wanted to do a little bit more research, or you can always email me. But I wanted to share that. So first is the Ken Brenner, which I mentioned that this will be folded into the citywide plan. I can quickly mention that you can look at the colors, right? The yellow is universally always residential. So if you look at the Ken Brenner here at the bottom, you have a lot of residential zoning. In the middle, the pink or the purple that you see, that is your commercial corridor, which is along Springfield Avenue. And then you have the orange, which is Park Residential. It is residential, but it has slightly different standards. Then on the other side, you have the Old Third Ward, which again will be folded into the citywide zoning. It also has a bunch of colors. Again, yellow is residential. You also have blue. This blue is actually public facilities. So it goes on, right? Your red is still the commercial. And I'll move ahead. The next one I wanted to share was the Lincoln Park redevelopment plan. That will stay, so we are not changing that. The other one is Living Downtown. That also is not changing. They will stay. And some of these plans have been amended several times. Again, we don't have to get into the details of that, but I just wanted to mention that the redevelopment plans are amended probably a few years later, just to keep up with the changes that are happening. Next is the downtown core. Now this one is pretty much centered around the Prudential Center. I think that was how it came into being. The goal was to spur development or have different kind of buildings around the core of the Prudential Center. Next is the Broad Street Station. Some of these redevelopment plans also have sub-districts. So in your map, you will see a couple of sub-districts for the Broad Street Station. What that means is that there is a specific goal for each district. So the standards are going to be slightly different in each of these districts. It could be in terms of the uses that are permitted or prohibited. It could be in terms of the building standards. Like one district could probably allow for, let's say, 4-story. Another district would allow for 8 stories, and so on. So the next one, I believe this is the last one, is the Newark Riverfront and Public Access Redevelopment Plan. This is along the Passaic River. So what you're going to see, it starts off at the top in the North Ward and then goes along the river and pretty much is into the East Ward, right? So this also has, I believe, 5 sub-districts or 4 sub-districts. The ones that I will focus on today are the ones in the middle here, which is the Lower Broadway and the downtown sub-district. Again, I won't get into the details, but just wanted to mention that these 2 sub-districts are in the Central Ward. We're not changing anything here. But I also have 2 maps here that show you what is the zoning for the Lower Broadway district and the downtown district. Again, some colors are, I'll take questions towards the end. Is that okay? All right, thank you. So again, the colors are universal. Yellow is your residential. Purple is industrial or mixed-use industrial. So you have your handouts to follow along. Again, I'm going to say that I'll take questions towards the end. That will just make it a little better. Okay, so this gives you a snapshot of all the neighborhoods that are included in the Central Ward. And then I also have a list of historic districts. So in the Central Ward, you have 7 redevelopment plans. You have 5 neighborhoods, and I covered some, but you have your Lower Broadway, University Heights, Belmont, Downtown, and Lincoln Park. There's also a small section in the West Side neighborhood that is included in the Central Ward. Then you have, I believe, 4 historic districts. Yes, one is the James Street Commons, second is the Military Park Commons, then 4 Corners, and then Lincoln Park. And then your map will help you see where these are located. So the map overlaps a little bit with the neighborhoods and the historic district, but it really gives you idea of what is there. Okay, so I wanted to zoom in on the neighborhoods. Instead of giving you a very high-level overview of the zoning for Central Ward, if you break it up or zoom into these neighborhoods, it becomes a little easy to understand what the zoning is. And then it also helps you understand what the zoning changes are in these neighborhoods. So the first one here is Lower Broadway. Again, you have your color code there. The yellow is a residential and so on. So what you can see here is, you see 3 colors, of course. One is green, which is the park. The second is predominantly yellow, which is your residential. You can see that it is not very light yellow, but it is slightly darker, which means that you have your R3 zoning and R4 zoning, which allows up to 3 family and then lower-rise multifamily. The other thing that I wanted to point is your commercial corridor, right? In this neighborhood, you have your commercial corridor, which is the Bloomfield Avenue, pretty much from one end to the other end. And then you also have Broadway, so these 2 intersect here. All right, so that gives you an overview of the zoning. You also see a piece of the Riverfront Redevelopment Plan, which I already covered in the previous slide. Okay, so I wanted to show you what the existing conditions are in some of these neighborhoods. Now, people say that you only focus on the photos that look bad. You didn't show the good part. Well, the reason is I have a limit on the number of slides that I can show. And the reason why I show these images is because these are the parcels, or these are the corridors that we are proposing to change with zoning. That's why I only wanted to focus on these parcels. So again, I don't have to talk too much, but pictures are pretty strong indication of the conditions that are there. Your handouts will probably give you a better idea. I'll slow down a little. And I show you which corridor this is. This is showing on Broadway. Another slide and a bunch of pictures on Bloomfield Avenue. Again, these are your commercial corridors, and there's a reason that I'm focusing on these corridors, because the proposed zoning is mostly about these commercial corridors and a little bit more about the design standards. I wanted you to look at this one image here that shows a slightly taller building. This is, yes, it's a 4-story building. And the reason why I'm focusing on that is, if you notice, it's a corner property, right? So all over the city, every single ward, every single neighborhood, you will see this condition. So while the corridor in the center will have these single-story, single-use buildings, or maybe it goes up to 2 and 3 stories, on corner lots, you're going to see buildings that are taller than the rest of the buildings on the corridor. They might go up to 4 stories, what you see here, or they can go up to 5 or 6 stories. And I think you have a condition here close by. I think MLK and Spruce Street, there's a building that is actually 6 stories. So again, that's a corner property, and I wanted to mention that because that's a condition that is all over the city and every single ward and neighborhood. Next is University Heights. Again, there's a reason why it's called University Heights. If you look at the colors of the zoning, predominant color here is blue, which is your institutional zoning, which allows for educational and other kinds of institutional buildings. Again, it's just a certain kind of zoning that allows a certain kind of building type and has a certain kind of building standards that are probably better for institutional buildings. And then you have a couple of other colors, which is predominant is yellow, of course, which is residential. And then you have it's hard to see here, but your handout will help you. There's orange, right? 2 shades of orange. You will see again. It's MX1, mixed use 1, and mixed use 2, which allows for mixed uses. Lighter color is less dense, less intense. Darker shade is more dense and more intense. You have a couple of parks, but you get the idea. And then again, your red is your C2 zoning. We don't have a lot of C3 all over the city. We do not. C3 is regional commercial, but we don't have a lot. Maybe way back then, Newark had a lot of regional commercial, but not anymore. Okay, again, some conditions in the University Heights neighborhood. And I have a slide that summarizes all these conditions. They're pretty similar, so that's why I thought I'll just summarize them all together. Okay, another slide. So I even tell you which section of this street it is. I think the top is Sussex Street, and I took it between 2 streets, Daria Street through J Street. So you see the conditions through those streets. And then I have Dickerson Street here, so a couple of images. Again, look at the corner condition here. This, I believe, is 3-story, but it has every story has more height than your usual normal story. Okay. Okay, so this is Belmont. Okay, because of what I told you how these redevelopment plans are, now you can see that Belmont has the old 3rd Ward redevelopment plan in it, right? It pretty much occupies most of the parcels, almost 50%, but then you can look at the surrounding zoning, which is yellow, which is residential. And then Old 3rd Ward will be folded into citywide zoning. So when I show you the proposed zoning, you can see what those parcels look like. And then your commercial corridor is along Springfield Avenue. It starts there in the Ken Brenner Springfield redevelopment plan, and it goes all the way through this neighborhood. Okay, some of these conditions, which are right around the corners. Again, you have your Somerset brownstones, but then there's a corner property that has been sitting vacant and dilapidated for a really long time. So I just chose those images, but they're beautiful buildings on this side here. So downtown, if you look at it, pretty much everything is gray. Because you can see the boundary of the downtown neighborhood, and all you see is gray parcels. You also see the outline of the redevelopment plans. So downtown is really about probably 4 redevelopment plans. You have a little piece of the Broad Street station at the top. Then along the river, you have the Newark Riverfront and Public Access redevelopment plan. Then at the center, you have living downtown, and here, a small piece here is the downtown core, which is really around the Prudential Center. Again, you do have the surrounding zoning, but pretty much everything in the downtown neighborhood is gray. And we are not changing that. None of these redevelopment plans are changing, which means that downtown zoning will not change. All right, Lincoln Park, which is pretty much to the bottom of the ward. So you can see, let me see, it's hard for me to see. Okay, so you see on the top here, that is the Lincoln Park redevelopment plan. And at the bottom here, you have a couple of parcels. Again, your predominant zoning is residential, which is denoted by the yellow color. And then you have commercial, which is, you don't see McCarter, but you have McCarter here, Broad Street, and then Clinton. So these are your commercial corridors. Everybody knows Broad Street, McCarter. But most of, like I would say 50% of this neighborhood is covered by the redevelopment plan, and the 50% you have citywide zoning. And then what happens is towards the bottom, you see all these pink or purple shades. So your pink or purple or magenta, no, pink maybe, yes. So these are residential zones, right? So you have your, which are denoted by I1, I2, and I3. Again, if you go with I1, it's going to be lighter color. It's going to be less intense industrial uses. And I1 usually coexists with residential zones. If you look at I1 zones, they're always around the periphery of the residential zones because it is not as intense and as polluting as the other industrial zones. So you have your I1, and it's always used for separating the more intense and dense industrial zones, which are the I2 and I3. So you're going to see I1 transition to I2, and it goes on. But it goes beyond the boundaries of the neighborhood. Okay, again, existing conditions. Now, everybody knows McCarter. When you enter, Newark, you have all these auto sales. You also have a storage facility. You also have a lot of auto sales I mentioned, then auto repair shops, and all sorts of uses, right? It's really a mix of everything you can think about. Okay, so I went ahead and summarized all these uses, and you can choose to disagree with me, but I thought it will be a good starting point to just summarize everything, right? So I mentioned auto body repair shops, and you saw them plenty. Vacant land, abandoned, dilapidated buildings, vacant storefronts, dated structures, single-story, single-use buildings, some unsafe conditions, just from the deterioration of the building and less upkeep of the sidewalks. Numerous curb cuts. So corridor is not pedestrian friendly, that we all know, because all these uses are pretty much auto-centered, auto-oriented. What you also see is, again, this story is for all the corridors, right? All the corridors that you look at, you're going to see sometimes just a small speck of red, right? What that tells you is that these are really undersized lots. And what undersized lots mean is that your standard lot size in the city of Newark is 25 by 100, right? Anything less than that, and could be anything, could be 24 by 100, 99 by 25, or less than that. And then some are also odd-shaped lots. And you're going to see these odd-shaped lots all throughout the corridors. These are like weird triangles. And it's hard to build on those commercial or those commercially zoned parcels because Well, yes, you have the C2 zoning there, but you need to have substantial parcel size to enable development that is transformative, that is impactful, and really adds to the vibrancy of the corridor or the neighborhood, right? If you have smaller parcels, you basically hinder development, right? These corridors, although some parcels have the C2 zoning, which really is giving you a lot, 5 stories, commercial on the ground floor, and then the rest of the stories could be commercial, residential. Well, when you have a really small parcel to begin with, you really can't enable development. So, but this is the summary. Feel free to disagree or agree. Okay. So I mentioned this in the beginning, right? Yes, there are some beautiful conditions, right? There are some parcels that are really great, but I don't have pictures of those because I wanted to focus on the parcels or sections that were not doing well, and I wanted to see how land use or changes in land use can address those parcels or those conditions. Okay, so I have a long list here. For those of you who don't know what is NZLUR, we lovingly call it NUZLR. It is Newark Zoning Land Use Regulations. So that is what it is. But I have a whole list here, right? It's for you to read. I don't want to go through every single one of them because we might end up being here till 9 o'clock. But let me focus on just 2 of them because they pretty much summarize everything. The first one, right? To revitalize, strengthen, and transform the corridors into vibrant and lively destinations and connectors. And the third one I wanted to focus is to improve walkability and create a pedestrian-friendly environment. So those are the 2 that I wanted to focus on. And I keep saying this, right? The corridors really are an indication of how the city is doing, right? When you have a corridor that has a lot of, well, I guess let me put it this way. When a corridor needs a lot of improvement, a lot of improvement, that's a sign that some of these parts of the city are not doing so well, right? The neighborhoods are great, but the corridors need some improvement. And that could be achieved by way of the zoning, changing some of the standards. So that is what we are trying to achieve here. Okay, so why amend NUZLR? So for those of you who participated in the Newark 360 Master Plan engagement, you know that there was really a lot of engagement that happened in every single ward, every single neighborhood. And some of the recommendations came from you all, right? And we have codified them or laid them out in the Newark 360 document, which should be online. It's still online. And you can go through them. It really sets specific goals. And these goals are coming from recommendations that were made by people that live within these neighborhoods. So it's the community that made those recommendations. So they are coming from there. And Newark 360 or the master plan is a planning document, right? It is only recommendations, it's the vision, right? But the next step that happens after the master plan is the codification or the changes in the zoning ordinance that really enable things, that really help you achieve the vision or the goals that the community set in the master plan. Because without this step, all that master plan does is just probably sits on the shelf. It's a policy document. You can talk about it for a really long time, but it's not going to help you change these conditions. So this is the next step that is needed, right? If you don't do this, you don't achieve anything by way of the master plan also. So this is the next step. Okay. So there's another reason why we are doing this, right? Every city, I guess, every city is trying to address this. There is a need for housing, right? There is a need for housing. There is a need for affordable housing, and there is a need for a varied mix of housing types, right? We're not just talking about 1 family, 2 family, but really the number and the type and the variety of housing that's needed. Because these are needs that change every few years, right? And what we do is well, legally, we are supposed to do this kind of analysis every 10 years. That's what the master plan is. Every 10 years, you re-examine the master plan, and then you also tweak the zoning ordinances, right? It depends. What are the goals? You know, how much do you want to tweak the zoning for these parcels, right? Some cities don't need a lot, some cities need a lot, right? So that's for the city to decide, that is for the community to decide, but it really comes to that. What are you trying to achieve? Are you only trying to achieve retail on the corridors, then you just subzone the corridors, right? Are you also trying to address more housing needs, varied type of housing? Then you fold that into the ordinance, right? So those are the two goals here we have. To make sure that the recommendations that were made through the master plan engagement are codified in the ordinance. And then next is, you know, our need to really achieve increase in the number of housing units. And I'll get to that, how the ordinance does it, but I wanted to lay that out here. And I'll talk about what IZO is. Okay, we don't make it clear here, but I'll make it clear. So IZO is the city's inclusionary zoning ordinance. If you all know, it was adopted. When it was adopted, the threshold really was 30 units, and I'll explain what that is. So anytime a development comes in and the project is building 30 units, right, then the IZO, the inclusionary zoning ordinance, is triggered, which means that of those 30 units, 20% have to be affordable units, right? There's also language there in terms of the tiers, right? The tiers, that is your 40, 60, and 80% AMI, right? Area medium income. So that's the one requirement. There's also a requirement, and I have a slide there, but I think I'm jumping ahead here. There's another slide that talks about, it also has language where it specifies what type of units they should be. They should not just be your studio and one-bedroom units. They should also have a mix of your two-bed. So it should be studio, it should be one-bedroom, it should be two-bedroom, and it should be three-bedroom. So we don't just say that, okay, when you try to meet the 20% affordable, it should only be studio units. No, you are supposed to have a mix of those units that I just described. And there's a language that specifies the percent. But I'm not going to get into that. I'll just move forward. Okay, so this is what the proposed zoning looks like. And I thought I will place the existing and the proposed side by side so you can see the changes. So let me summarize again the changes, right? So you can focus on those things. The changes are, and in the map you can only look at the parcel color changes. The building standard changes, I will talk about it later. You're not going to see it in the slides, okay? But I'll talk about it. So I said this, right? The proposed zoning is really about upzoning the corridors, right? And increasing the intensity of these corridors so you don't have the gap in these corridors. And what I mean is you can have a couple of parcels that are commercial, then you have a gap of or zoning that is a different zoning, right? And it worked at that time. In 2015, when they first adopted the ordinance, right, we didn't have the need so much for the housing or for the retail, right, or commercial. But now is the time, right? That's why if you look at the corridors, and this is your Bloomfield Avenue. So on that slide or that image over there, that's your existing zoning. If you look here, the intensity of the commercial corridors, and the intensity you can tell from the color red that we have increased. What you have is more parcels have the red color, which is your C2, which is the commercial zoning that allows commercial on the ground floor and commercial or residential on the floors above, right? That is the zoning here. Right besides it, you have a lighter pink, which is your C1 zoning, which is again commercial, but less intense, right? So let me also explain in terms of the building design standards. Your current C2 zoning allows for buildings up to 5 stories high, right? And again, you have the commercial on the ground and the commercial or residential on the other floors. I'm gonna keep repeating it so you guys understand, I don't miss it out, okay. But now the proposed zoning changes that from 5 stories, we are changing that to 8 stories, okay? But the commercial or retail is still required on the ground floor, okay? C1 zoning, which allows for 4 stories as per the current ordinance, we are allowing in the proposed zoning ordinance, we are taking it from 4 stories to 5 stories. But there's another important change that we are making. C1 zoning, which is your commercial again, it still requires you, as per the current zoning, still requires you to have commercial on the ground floor. And that is a problem, because if you look at retail, it's not doing so well, right? Look at downtown. There are so many vacancies because we are forcing projects to have that commercial component on the ground floor. So while the units on the upper floors get occupied pretty quickly, they probably, they get tenants right even before the project is built out. The retail sits vacant, and it sits vacant for years. I have seen it. I've been here for 7 years. I've seen some buildings that have vacancy that goes on and on and on, right? So we are changing that by changing the zoning for C1. We say that you don't have to have commercial on the ground floor, but you can have any other kind of use that could be residential, that could be any kind of community space, that could be any kind of flex space. Again, the goal here is to avoid that vacancy, because as you walk along these buildings and you consistently see boarded up or vacant ground floors, that's not a good thing, right, as you're walking by. So our goal is just to activate the space, and it only benefits the community, right? It benefits the community. So by giving that flexibility, we feel that we can take care of the vacancy here. So the number of stories for C1 changed from 4 stories to 5 stories. Okay, so let me see here. So that's what you're going to see. In this slide here, I'm going to say that you're going to see upzoning along Broadway, and that's evident by the change in the color of the parcels. You're going to see more of the darker red, and then right after the darker red, you're going to see C1 zoning, and then you have your residential. So it's a nice transition going from C2, which is at 8-story, C1, which is now at 5-story, and then you have your residential, right? So from the color of this, I can say this is probably R3, which allows up to 3 stories, okay? This is a presentation for Central Ward. We already did North Ward presentation. I'm sorry? We did notify. So I can say this, right? I'm sorry. We do have some of the members from your North Ward here. They attended it. But can I say this? So all the presentations are on the website, okay? By the end of this, the presentation, I have a slide that will give you the link, right? You can go there. You can take a look at that presentation. There's also an email address. You can also call me, actually. But end of the meeting, I'll give you my phone number. There's also email, which I check every single day. So you can contact me, okay? If you really have questions and the presentation is not making clear, you can come to our office and ask questions to me, okay? All right. But I think in the beginning of the presentation, I said this, that every presentation that we are doing is very ward specific. Today we are in the Central Ward, and the presentation is very much centered on how the proposed zoning ordinance or changes will impact the Central Ward. We already covered that for the North Ward in the North Ward meeting. I'll keep moving along. Okay, I forgot, did I cover this? I think I did. Yes, I did. Okay, moving along.
When will we have a chance to talk about the increased density? Because being a longtime Central Ward resident, that was a serious issue in the Central Ward. The density was so intense that, you're right, and as a result of that, primarily it was public housing, where we had the large amount of residential units in terms of the number of units.
Okay, so can I make a request? Like I mentioned in the beginning, I'll take all the questions towards the end of the presentation, right? We learned this the hard way when we did the first presentation, and we let people ask all the questions. It went on till like very late, so I want to be respectful and mindful of everybody's time. I will give you time to ask questions, but just it will be helpful to do it towards the end, okay? All right then. So University Heights, again, I mentioned that you're going to see a lot of blue here. That is your institutional zoning. We are not changing that. But again, if you look at the red, that's where you're going to see the change, right? A lot of parcels that are now zoned as C2. And then right along C2, you're going to see C1 parcels, okay? And I want to mention this, right? I want to tie this to the initial slides that I showed you. When I showed you the existing conditions, I made an attempt to show you the conditions of some of these parcels that we are changing the zoning for. So you can see why are we changing the zoning here, because you can tie it back to the conditions that I showed you in the initial slides. Okay, so moving on, Belmont, right? I mentioned this in the beginning, that in Belmont, you have this old third ward redevelopment plan. We are folding that into the citywide zoning. That's why all the gray that you see here, now it has colors, which means that that is the citywide zoning, okay? Again, so if you look here, some of these parcel colors of the zoning, we pretty much took from what the old third ward had to begin with, right? But then we kept in line with intensifying the commercial corridor. So that's why some of the red parcels that you see, that is in line with the commercial corridor upzoning. So your main commercial corridor here is the Springfield Avenue that you see here cutting across diagonally. So downtown, in the initial slide I had shown you that in the downtown neighborhood, all you have are these redevelopment plans, and these we are not changing. So you have your a little part of the Broad Street Station. You have one district of the Newark Riverfront and public access. You have your living downtown and your downtown core. We are not changing that, which means that for this neighborhood, there are no zoning changes, unless we decide to amend the redevelopment plans, but that is not on the table right now. Okay, Lincoln Park. Again, this neighborhood has the Lincoln Park redevelopment plan. We are not changing that. So you're going to see in the proposed map here, you're going to see that gray area because we are not changing that redevelopment plan. And the other zoning changes are in keeping in line with the corridor upzoning. So you're going to see that along Clinton Avenue, Broad Street, and McCarter, okay? So it's this section here. And you can actually go back to the existing condition slides that I showed, because I pretty much focused on this area here for this neighborhood. So again, this is McCarter, this is Broad, this is Trechner, and I believe this is Parkhurst, okay?
And what is the other parameter? Is that Dr. MLK Boulevard, or what is that? That's going straight, so almost kind of like triangular to McCarter Highway. I can't.
Triangular to McCarter Highway.
The next thoroughfare that's going through, that's white, from McCarter Highway, and then, oh, is that Broad Street? Broad?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. West Side, I mentioned this initially, although I did not say this neighborhood is part of this ward, but there's a small section here that is covered by the central ward boundaries, right? And that's the Ken Brenner Springfield redevelopment plan. We are folding that into citywide zoning. That's why the section that you see gray over there, you're gonna see those parcel color changes, right? Again, keeping in line with those corridor upzoning changes, you're going to see more red along Springfield Avenue, and then adjacent to the darker red, you're going to see lighter red, which is your new C1 zoning, okay?
And just a question, when you say rolling it into the citywide plan, could you just expound on that? Exactly what do you mean by that?
So what that means is, so these three redevelopment plans, right? I'll take example of Old Third Ward, right? Old Third Ward has been in place since 1965, I believe, and it has been amended 21 times, right? When you keep doing that, that's a sign that it's about time to either take away the redevelopment plan, right, or drastically change the zoning or the standards of the redevelopment plan. You don't want to keep, so we could have amended it the 22nd time, right? But that's not what we wanted to do. We kept the the redevelopment designations, right? Because there's some tax abatement maybe tied to it, but the standards, we are applying the citywide standards. And I'll speak a little on the Ken Brenner plan, right? If you look at the Ken Brenner plan, what you have, and I showed this initially, right? You have your predominant residential zoning, you have your commercial zoning along the Springfield Avenue corridor. The standards are now very different from the citywide zoning. When you look at the 1, 2, and 3 family or commercial zoning, it's now very different, right? But when we fold it into the citywide zoning, it kind of helps us achieve a more cohesive kind of development, right? Instead of Ken Brenner being its own thing. There's also a lot of projects in Ken Brenner that are going before the zoning board, and most of them are being approved. So instead of continuing to keep it as is and allowing more projects to go to the zoning board, we thought it would be prudent to just fold it into the citywide zoning, which is now more permissive. Because that's the goal, right? If you leave them as is, they end up being very restrictive, and development is not triggered there, right? So when you fold it in, you're making them more permissive and more in line with the goals of the city. Again, the goals are coming, the recommendation, or the policy suggestions are coming from the master plan engagement, okay? Okay, so I had shown you the zoning, existing zoning and proposed zoning of all the neighborhoods. Now I have just pieced it together, and here you have your central ward, right? This is what it looks like. You still have some of these redevelopment plans that are intact, but what you're going to see is the upzoning along Springfield Avenue and some of the other major corridors, okay? So I talked about 2 things, right? Why amend Nussler? I talked about the need for housing. So there is a study that was put together by Rutgers, and it's the Climate Institute, and it talks about the need for additional housing. It also gives us a number, right? It talks about how city needs an additional 16,234 units, and it talks about the price that it should be renting at, right? It also breaks it down, and I've only highlighted 2 points here. You can take a look at the others. But it also highlights the breakdown, right? It talks about certain number that should be 2-bedroom and a certain number that should be 3-bedroom. Because again, city's goal is not just to enable studio apartments, 1-bedroom apartments, but to really offer more in terms of the variety. So it's not just your studio and 1-bedroom, but 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom, because there is a need for it. And we do that by changing the zoning ordinance, by coupling it or combining it with the inclusionary zoning ordinance. And I can explain now, right? When we change certain standards, and I'll talk about them, but when you enable more development in terms of the units, so the 30, let me step back a little bit. So the IZO, when it was adopted, right, the threshold was 30 units. That was recently amended. Now the threshold is not 30 units, but 15 units. That means if a project comes in with even just 15 units, it still needs to comply with the IZO, which in the first round, it would not have had to comply, right? But now it has to. So even when you come in with 15 units, you have to provide 20% that are affordable units. And not just studio and 1-bedroom, but you have to provide 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom, right? So that's how we achieve that. And the report is online. I'll also make sure that I upload it to the link that I have all these other presentations, so you can take a look. So I also wanted to point out to this. So city has ambitious plans to build 3,000 new homes across Newark's 5 wards by 2026, and to create or preserve at least 6,000 affordable housing units for its low-income residents. So the need is there, right? Every single ward, every single neighborhood has a need for housing. How do you achieve that? By not drastically impacting the neighborhood. The best way to do that would be to enable this kind of housing or development on the corridors, because the corridors have the capacity, they have the infrastructure, so they can handle it, as opposed to the neighborhoods, the inner neighborhoods. So these are some of the things that I laid out here, right? And it talks about different ways that the city can achieve these goals. So I am only here today to talk about land use changes because that's what I deal with. But then there are other changes here. So while land use is one of the changes, it's one of the more impactful changes, right? It's one of the more impactful ways of achieving these goals. The other really are the Newark Inclusionary Zoning Ordinance, which really works hand in hand with the zoning changes. And I explained that, what it is. The next one, which is a recent initiative, is the Equitable Investment in Newark Communities. So the city is really enabling minority developers, women developers, right, to change some of the parcels that have been lying vacant for years, for decades, right? But the way the city is doing it, the city is very intentional in triggering development on these parcels. We are making sure, and this is one of the initiatives of the mayor, we are making sure that the community gets some benefit out of it, right? So it's not just your units, the affordable units, but it could be any kind of other amenity that is beneficial to the community. So this initiative just started. I'm sure they will have a lot more community engagement for these specific projects and parcels where the engagement will be focused on what is the need of that particular community and how can this development try to incorporate that need or accommodate those needs, right? But that's a new initiative. Next is the Newark Rent Control Policy. The other one, these are the common ones. This is the Newark Emergency Rental Assistantship Program. We had that a couple of years ago, but it's an ongoing program. Then you have your Housing Choice Program. But I am only here to talk about land use today. So I get into trouble when I talk about this slide, right? But I still wanted to put it up there because as a city, I think we need to be mindful of the community needs and also the developer community. Because you need to have a middle ground. You need to understand the issues on both sides. That's why you can reach to some kind of consensus. So this is really getting into the details of the ordinance, right? The last time we did this kind of community meeting, we left out these details. It was a very high-level overview or summary of the zoning ordinance, but now we are getting into the details, right? So what are definitions? And this is Chapter 2 in the zoning ordinance. That is online. The link I will share, it is online. So Chapter 2 is definitions. And what are these? These are basically uses, right? For us to either enable or permit or prohibit some uses, you have to define them in the ordinance. So that chapter, the definition chapter, really talks about what these uses are. So that we either prohibit them or we allow them, right? And then how do we get to this, right? Every couple of years, right, the needs of the community change, the market standards change, the industry standards change. I think at least every 10 years, we have to be mindful of these changes because if we are not, we leave out some of the uses that might be beneficial to the community. So it's important to at least do some kind of assessment or analysis of these new uses and see if the city could allow them, if it really fits into the community and the community needs. So you're going to see a whole lot of new uses that the city will be allowing. And I can give you one example, right? The current ordinance that was adopted in 2015 does not have a use that is banquet hall. And you have no idea how many calls we get in the office asking us if, they just come to us and bring in permits for banquet hall because they're just changing the retail space to a banquet hall. And we have to tell them that banquet hall is not permitted anywhere in the city. Imagine that, right? And we say that we know the use is beneficial to the community, but we are going to send it to the zoning board because nowhere in the city is a banquet hall allowed. So I just use that as an example. I mean, it's a true example, but I thought I would be able to explain it better as compared to the other uses. But I want to highlight another use here. So warehousing categories, right? Like I said, industry standards change, market standards change, right? Or market trends change, right? And you have to at least take a look at these uses and see how you can change these things or accommodate these things or prohibit, whatever your goal is, right? So right now, the ordinance has just a warehouse, right? It doesn't really get into the specifics of it, but as you know, as the industry is changing, even the warehousing has different categories, right? Even the state has laid out a document that talks about these different categories of warehousing. Now, how do you not be in line with what the state has put out, right? You have to take a look at that, decide for yourself, or the city has to decide that, right? So these are the kind of specific warehousing categories that we have broken it down into. And they will be included in the new ordinance. So some of the other changes, and one change that I wanted to mention here specifically is that, well, I have a last slide that will really kind of make it very clear for you. But so the current ordinance doesn't allow a 4-family. We are enabling that use of 4-family. Let me see what I can cover here. Okay, but I think I have other slides that will talk about these things. Let me skip this one. Okay, so accessory dwelling units. What is that? It's an additional unit on a property, right? And then there are standards to go with it. So one family can have an accessory dwelling unit, a 2-family can have it, but it lays it out, right? You're gonna see some changes in the color of the text and some strike through, because I wanted to leave it there, but do a strike-through, because in the other ones that we made the presentation, we did not have the strike-through, and that was causing some kind of issue. I guess one standard was contradicting with the other, but something like that. So that's why we took out that last piece that says that about the footprint of the ADU. We took that out, and we are going with the standard that you see a blue color. So 1 ADU per property, then the floor area of the ADU shall not exceed 400 square feet or 25% of the floor area of the principal dwelling. Principal dwelling is your main house, main structure. Whichever is greater, but not to exceed 600 square feet. So really, your ADU is going to be between 400 square feet and 600 square feet. Then there are other standards, right? The other important standard that I wanted to mention is that ADUs, accessory dwelling unit, will only be allowed on a property that has square footage of at least 3,000 square feet. Now tie that back to the information that I gave you a couple of minutes ago. The standard lot size in the city of Newark is 25 by 100. You can build a 1-family, a 2-family, and now a 3-family on a 25 by 100 lot. So not every lot is going to be able to have a ADU on their property, right? Because you're not meeting that standard that I just mentioned. There's a few more standards, and I have laid it out here for you. Another important piece that I wanted to mention is that ADUs will only be for long-term rental, not short-term rental. Subdivision will not be allowed, so you cannot separate your ADU from the main house, the property. You cannot subdivide. And then owner occupancy will be required. Owner occupancy for either the main building, the main home, or the ADU, okay? And the reason why we say that is, we've looked at some neighborhoods where we have some senior citizens living on their own. It's hard for them, well, they don't have much income, so it's hard for them to keep up with the upkeep of the property, but they do want to continue living there, right? So this provides a good source of income so they can continue to live in the neighborhood, in the community that they grew up in, and age in place. So another piece that the new zoning ordinance enables is home occupation. And you might have heard me say this in every single presentation, but when COVID happened, people lost their jobs and people wanted to start some kind of business from their home. The current zoning ordinance does not allow that, and that's why we ran into some issues where we do wanted to help the community, but we also had to go by the zoning ordinance, right? So we were kind of stuck there. And that's why as part of this initiative or this new proposed ordinance, we are allowing home occupations, right? And it has a lot of standards that go with it. Every use, every building has standards. So your home occupation will also have standards, and I have laid them out for you. But it could be any kind of use here, right, that I have mentioned here. The bottom line is that it should not create any kind of nuisance or pollution, right? Those are things that would trigger issues that the code violation or code enforcement office will be involved in. So you really have to be careful. As per the standards, if it's nuisance producing, pollution producing, it's not allowed. But we try to include a couple of these uses, which could be here on the top. It says here, permitted home-based businesses include personal instruction, general medical or professional office, personal care, art production, and so on, tailoring, sewing, food production, baking. It goes on, right? Now, we can't have absolutely every single thing listed here, so we would just have to, look at the use that you're bringing in and then see whether it fits into those standards, if it makes sense. But we try to include as many uses as we could, that we could think of.
Excuse me. Lisa, a question on the home uses as it relates to parking. I know you can't plan for every eventuality, but what safeguards are in place to ensure that somebody doesn't, operate a home business that then attracts, 20 people that take up all the available street parking?
So there's a piece here.
I read that as to mean like their use and business must have, like if you have a food truck.
I think the way that this is written is that additional parking is allowed, but you can't have trucks parking or people coming to this home, right, to buy stuff or deliver stuff. You can't have that out of control.
Yeah.
There are standards, and that's why I said it's code enforcement. But you have to look at the bigger benefit too. I know you can ask me 100 questions and I might not have all the answers right now, right? But what we started off is looking at the bigger picture, right? Like I said, I mentioned to you, right? When COVID happened, we ran into this issue, right? Yes.
I think it's a great issue. I'm not necessarily opposed to this by itself, but my suggestion would be to somehow cap, like your business cannot attract or, occupy X number of parking spaces. And that's the safeguard for me as a community resident, that if someone does have a home occupation that fits the standards, but they take up 10.
Absolutely. No, you're making valid points. Absolutely.
So just out of respect, we had everybody else hold questions. So team, great, but please let us continue. She's got about 15 more minutes. And
I'm sorry, I didn't know I ordered. Thank you.
No, and I encourage, right? Question me, question our standards, whatever you're proposing, because this is just a start, right? I appreciate the question. Thank you. But there are standards, even parking related, okay? Okay, let me move along. So again, this goes to permitted uses. Okay, I mentioned how we increase the definitions, and that's how we are increasing the number of permitted uses. That makes sense in those zones, right? There's a note here, if you see that hashtag, there's two things, right? Uses are permitted, and then some uses are also conditionally permitted. There are certain conditions that go with those uses, right? What we are doing is some of these conditional uses, we are making or moving them to the section that's called additional standards. Again, the standards are still there. We are just moving them from conditional standards to additional standards. People or projects or whatever that development is, it still has to comply. Okay? Same thing here. Again, this was highlighted from the last presentation, but it's the same thing here. I think it was the highlighted section was, more for the East Ward because they have more of the industrially zoned parcels, I-1, I-2, and I-3, so those were highlighted. But again, new uses added to certain zones. Some are actually prohibited from certain zones, like your waste transfer station. Again, it doesn't apply here, but I just wanted to make that point. There's one standard that we have changed for, and this is a standard that is for all types of building, your 1, 2, 3 family or other buildings. The way that the impervious cover is calculated is, if you look at the standards, there's a front yard impervious cover, there's a certain cap there, and there's a rear yard impervious cover, there's a certain cap there. Now, so what that does is it leaves out the side yards, right? So you're not, the project is not made to comply with the whole parcel, right? We thought that by turning it into just impervious cover for the whole lot, turning that calculation, instead of splitting up into front yard and rear yard, why not make that project accountable for the whole lot, right? That's what we did. Because when you start having multiple buildings on the property, and then sometimes corner lots, it gets a little confusing as to which is the front yard, which is the rear yard, right? And sometimes those standards you can't even apply. So we thought that we could just turn that breakup into the whole lot, so you have a cap on the impervious cover for the whole lot. So that is what that is. So these are really standards that sometimes the community is interested in. How do the standards change our change for our buildings, one family? So I just explained that the front yard impervious cover, rear yard, we are merging them and making it into like the whole lot impervious cover. There's a cap on that. One family standards don't change so much, but there's one point I wanted to make. Again, going back to the point where your standard lot size is 25 by 100, right? If you see most of these vacant parcels, they are vacant. One of the reasons why they sit vacant for a really long time is because they are undersized lots. Anytime it's an undersized lot, it has to go before the zoning board if they're putting in a two-family, right? Zoning board, wait time again is 6 months, 8 months, 9 months. A two-family has to wait for that long to get approval. And what that really does is when you don't allow development to happen on undersized lot, these parcels sit vacant forever. So most of the parcels that you see are those parcels because no one is interested. So we are changing. So coming to the point, right? There is a standard for your 1, 2, and 3 family that the rear yard setback, which means that the distance between your rear property line to the back of the building, your rear yard setback should be 30 feet. When the lot is undersized, projects are not able to meet that requirement. So instead of saying 30 feet, we're changing that to a percent. It's 30%. So this way, even undersized lots would be able to meet that requirement. So that's the change in your one family and also two family. But that's what it is. So the standards are pretty much what I explained to you for the two family also. 3 families, same thing, but the big change is that right now, 3 families allowed on a 35 by 100 lot. We are allowing it on a 25 by 100 lot because the standards are exactly the same for a 2 family and a 3 family. Another big change that this ordinance is proposing is that, if some of you know, 1 and 2 family, if it meets the standards that I had laid out in the previous slide, if they meet the standards, they go straight to permits, right? No variances, they go straight to permits. What we are proposing is that a 3 family, if that also meets the standards, that can also go straight to permits. According to the current ordinance, it ends up before the board. But like I said, because there's no difference between the standards of a 2 and 3 family, that's why we are proposing that change. Then you have your low-rise multifamily. Let me see here. So one big change here is that the lot area requirement for the low-rise multifamily, according to the current ordinance, is 10,000 square feet. We are changing that to 5,000 square feet. Why? Because we think we can get more units out of it, and every development might trigger affordable, the IZO ordinance. So those are the changes there. I'm just trying to see if I can see them. Okay. All right. And again, the front yard impervious, rear yard impervious, that also applies. Then we talk about other building types, right? You have your mid-rise multifamily. So according to this chart, the current standard for a mid-rise multifamily, it's allowed on a 10,000 square feet lot. We're changing that to 7,500. Those are the changes, main changes. Let me see here. Okay, no change in height here. And then your high-rise multifamily, right? If you see here, it's not changing anything. Only the building coverage is changing from 60 to 70. And then impervious also, but no change in the lot size requirements. Okay, so these are just other types of building, but I mentioned this to you, right? The C1, we changed that from 4 stories to 5 stories. C2, we changed that from 5 stories to 8 stories. C3, no changes. And there's one change. I didn't get to the MX1 and 2. MX1 and MX2, those are the lighter orange and dark orange. Currently, as per the current ordinance, they are allowed to go up to, any building in those two zones is allowed to go up to 4 stories. We are changing that. We are changing MX1 from 4-story to 6-story, and then MX2 from 4-story to 8 stories. Again, this is another type of building. It's your detached commercial. I believe no changes here. Okay. Okay, no change. Okay. So these are other chapters in the ordinance. And again, like I said, last time we did this kind of engagement, we didn't talk about these standards, right? These chapters. So we wanted to lay them out here this time. The next chapter is parking. We are not changing parking. But what we are doing is, to enable walkability, we are also increasing the bike parking. Then there's another piece that is about electric vehicle parking and charging. The ordinance now has certain standards to enable infrastructure for electric vehicle parking. There's also a certain percent, like when you have parking for a certain project, a certain percent of it has to be for electric vehicle parking. And then you also have to have the charging infrastructure. Parking design standards, we're not changing anything. We just moved one small section from parking design standards to buffer standards. What that means is that anytime a project has parking, they're supposed to provide some kind of buffer. The buffer could be in terms of some planting or a wall, right? We just moved that section from parking standards to buffer standards. Signs, again, minor changes, and this goes back to the point that I made about market trends, industry standards, right? Right now, we do have signage in the current ordinance, but things change, right? And when you look at the market trends or industry standards, we wanted to be mindful of that. So you will see a few more types of signs that would be allowed. There's also a piece in the current ordinance where, for example, if you have a mixed-use building, if you have multiple tenants on the ground floor, the current ordinance does not allow each tenant to have a sign. So even if you have multiple tenants, you're only supposed to have one sign, which means that the others have to go to the board for approval. That doesn't make sense. So what we're saying is every tenant in the mixed-use building can have their own sign. Okay, so site plan procedure. So this is another chapter. I talked about the 3-family that would be exempt from board review. If it meets standards, it will go straight to permits. There's also a few more things. It talks about rehabilitation of structure, which means that, if people are changing, let's say, they already have 4 units, but they want to increase, add 1 more unit, that is possible. Then there's also a piece that talks about temporary uses, right? Current ordinance doesn't have temporary uses, so we get calls, we get inquiries, and I believe every city, every town has this piece. So we are including that piece in our ordinance. But this is the chapter about site plan application. It tells you as to what is the applicability, right? When is a project supposed to go for a board review and when it could be administratively approved. So those are the kind of criteria that are laid out in this chapter. Another important piece is the technical review. For some of you that don't know, every single time we have a project that comes into the office, we do sit down with the developers and we have like it's called a pre-submission meeting, right? That happens, but it's not mandatory, right? It's not mandated because if they come in and we say that it's a large project, we would like to have a sit down with you to work out all the issues that might be. They could be issues related to infrastructure, related to things that are overseen by the Water and Sewer Department or the Engineering Department, right? So we like to have a sit down. But what this proposed ordinance is doing is that it is mandating that technical review. So there's a threshold there. It says here, if any development comes in for 15 units or more, or in terms of square footage, if it's 10,000 or greater square feet for non-residential, then that's the threshold. That's when you have a technical review with all the departments. So you work out whatever the infrastructure needs are, whatever the impact is, right, before they even go for board approval. Again, it's extremely helpful for larger projects because that gives us the opportunity to do an assessment of the infrastructure. And if upgrade is needed, that's where water and sewer have that latitude to require the developer to upgrade the system. Then you have landscaping. So these, if you see 4116.2, so these are sections within those chapters. There's a section about landscaping, and it's under the chapter 16. So we want to prioritize native species. There's also language about tree replacement. Right now we don't have it, but anytime a development comes in and they have to chop trees, there is a tree replacement that would be required. There's also payment in lieu, which means that, so let me step back a little bit. So every development, right, there's a requirement for tree planting, right? There's two kinds of tree planting requirements. One is the on-street tree parking requirement. One is the on-site tree parking requirement. Now, for if any reason the developer cannot plant a tree, and let's say the parcel is at an intersection and the tree requirement might be blocking the line of sight, then you can plant a tree. So in that case, they have to make a payment, right? So we're increasing that payment from $750 to $2,000. So that's what it is. No changes in the buffer, but I mentioned to you the parking design standards have been moved into this section. And then screening, we say, okay, so we're changing the wall height or the fence height from 5 to 6. Again, I slightly talked about fences and walls. There's also lighting standards. These are all design standards, right? So when a building comes in, there's a parking standards, there's landscaping standards, there's signage, there's lighting standards, which means that they have to meet, like if you have entrance to the building, it has to be more lit than the other parts of the building, things like that. There's standards for that. Now, bird-friendly design, right? This is something that I should mention in the Central Ward. When you have taller buildings that are clad with glass, run into an issue where you have bird collision, right? And there's actually a group of people that goes out there every morning and they collect dead birds. And you'll be surprised the kind of species that you see. There's a website, actually. And so 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, actually, I was approached by this group. There's a lady from NJIT, and we worked with them to make sure that this time when we updated the ordinance that we included that piece. What it does is that it's certain kind of, reflectivity factor, threat factor, I think it's called, that's included in the material that clads the building, and it could be up to 75 feet or 100 feet, because that's where the collision happens most. So that piece, I won't go in depth, but that's what that piece is. Because you see taller buildings here in downtown. Okay, so the new proposed ordinance also has important pieces that talk about green building sustainability and resiliency standards. So there are a lot of standards, I have just laid them out here. They talk about, the roof design. They should be cool roofs, or green roofs, because we all know the urban heat island effect, and it's more pronounced here in the downtown area, because you have a lot of parking lots. But the cool roof, the blue roof, green roof, that reduces the intensity, or takes out the issue. There's also a piece about water conservation, materials and waste management. So the list goes on, right? But that's something I wanted to mention. So this is a slide that's important in terms of really summarizing the changes that come with the proposed ordinance. The black text that you see is as per the current ordinance, and the blue that I have added are the changes that come with the proposed ordinance. So let's say your R1, right? R1 residential single family. Right now it only allows single family home. Now it would allow single family plus ADU. Then your R2 would allow 1, 2, and 3 family. R2 actually currently allows 1 and 2 family. It would now allow a 3 family, so that should have been blue, plus ADUs, okay? R3 zone, 1, 2, 3 family, and 4 family residential. We also have a piece that talks about low-rise multifamily buildings on corner lots, up to 8 stories. And I showed you that condition, right? I showed you in one of the slides and one of the pictures. And that's something that you see absolutely everywhere in the city, in every ward, every neighborhood. The corner property, you're going to see it as sometimes a 4-story, a 5-story, up to 6-story. I've seen places where it is even 7-story. That's rare, but They do exist. Multifamily buildings, they do exist. So the list goes on, right? Let me see. R4, which is your low-rise residential, current ordinance allows it up to 4 stories. Now we're allowing it up to 5 stories. No change in your R5 and R6. C1 and C2, I talked about these two at length. Again, your C1, which is again your commercial, ground floor commercial or residential above. Currently, it allows up to 4 stories. It also forces you to have commercial on the ground floor. We are taking that away and providing some kind of flexibility, but we're changing from 4 stories to 5 stories. C2, that's the most change that you're going to see. We're going from 5 stories to 8 stories, but there's no flexibility for commercial. You should have commercial on the ground floor. C3, no change. MX1 and MX2, I talked about these changes. You will not see those changes in the colors of the maps that I showed you, but the changes are in the building design standards. So what that means is that, again, MX1 the current ordinance allows you to build up to 4 stories. We are changing that from 4 to 6. MX2 allows you to build up to 4 stories. We are changing that from 4 to 8. No change in MX3. I1, again, that's your light industrial. So I1 is a light industrial, I2 is medium industrial, I3 is heavy industrial. So the intensity changes, right? I1 is very less intense, and it coexists with residential. It's usually on the periphery of the residential zones. But the one change that we are making is that current ordinance allows I1 zone to have warehousing. We are taking that away. We are excluding large-scale warehousing and distribution from I1 zone because with I1 zone or with warehousing comes trucks, right? And like I mentioned, I1 is in close proximity to residential zones. That's why by taking that away, we are taking away the truck traffic and the pollution that comes with it. But that's pretty much it, okay? I believe this is my last slide, but so this is the email address that you can email your questions, right? If you can't find the presentation online, it is online. You can find it, I can email it to you. The whole draft with the track changes is on this link, which you have in your handout. Comment period will close on June 16th. So from now until June 16th, we are open to all kinds of questions, suggestions, recommendations, any issues you have, please email, because that is going to help us, okay? All right, yes. Let me hand it over to Allison first, okay? All right.
Thanks, Pallavi. So, thank you, Council President. Yes, thank you. So I know it was a lot of information. Thank you for your patience. We want to take questions and comments, and those who have come to other meetings, we bring you the mic, and so raise your hand, and we'll bring it to you. So I know there's a question here. Katim, if you want to have a follow-up. I know the woman in the front had a question, so I can start here.
Hi, Pallavi. I just had a question in reference to the home businesses. For those properties that are home businesses, would that affect how the property is taxed? Would the tax be higher? Or is that something you can't answer?
So that is a question that we've been looking into as it relates to land use and zoning. That's not something that we analyzed, but we do understand that there could be an increased assessment associated with individuals who choose to have that business. So it's definitely possible. Katim, did you want to?
Thank you for the presentation. My question is a little more broad than specific, but I'm just curious with some of the changes, and certainly those changes speak to like the positive outcomes of what the city wants to see, increase availability for housing, diversity in the different types of uses. I mean, has any analysis been done on like the potential negative implications? Like I can go on each side of these issues and say, well, at this, and what safeguards is the city kind of putting in place? Like my small question about the home occupation and like, somebody doing something that requires 20 parking spaces and what's going to, prevent that. So like, what is the position of the city on trying to safeguard against some of the negative potentials? I can go to another one, right? What is currently considered an unbuildable lot, right, in terms of the lot size. But now we're going to allow people to build on that. What safeguards are going to be in place to ensure that this is a really habitable place? Like, if my question is clear.
So I think Pallavi shared throughout our presentation that the basis for the changes that we're recommending were coming from the Newark 360 master plan visioning process that we went through for about 2 years. So that was the baseline. It was based upon some community feedback and additional research that we had done as a collective, as a city. So that's where the starting point was. And during those conversations, which I know I participated in several of them, and hopefully some of you did too, is that there were a whole gamut of kind of the SWOT analysis. The community did analysis about strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats. There were a lot of interactive discussions that were held in each ward where people were able to talk very freely and about what they thought for their community. And then what we did is we took that into account in the land use and zoning. I think that second, of course, there's always some type of impact. I think that what the team has put together was our best recommendation about how to minimize impact, but also think about the policies and positions that were supported through the master plan process, but also of the city. So it's both. So hope that helps. Yes, there's a question here with the microphone.
Yes.
And then there's a question over there.
I think my concern is really with regards to the increase of the density, especially in areas of the Central Ward that was previously where most of the high-rise public housing was, which are now pretty much townhomes. And having served on this on the Board of Commissioners for the Housing Authority, that was an issue that has been studied. I don't know whether or not we have looked at some of those prior studies in terms of the impact of density, especially in urban communities, where we are talking about families as well as income situations with families and the result of that. I know personally I've lived through a real nightmare in seeing what high density can cause. And a lot of times it starts off not being a problem initially. I'll give you an example of Brick Towers, Hill Manor. Those were all affordable housing resources that later turned into nightmares. Same with Douglas and Harrison. So I'm just wondering, have you looked at the historical context of some of the decisions that you're making? Because it seems as though we're maybe going in the opposite direction and revisiting things that we've already had experiences that have been negative. And just one final point. I'm concerned with not having expediting the permitting and not having the community to be advised, because there would have been maybe certain things that would have happened in the community had it not been that it had to go before the Board of Adjustment for zoning, and the community having an opportunity to put their concerns on the record. And many times those projects didn't move forward. So if you take that, you expedite it, that now is permitted, the community will not have an opportunity to have their voices be heard, and then you have something that once it's done, there's no turn back.
Sure. So great question. So definitely on affordable housing, there was our thought is not to concentrate affordable housing. Our thought is to create more housing that's affordable and more housing that's in mixed income communities, but also mixed income buildings. So that's the whole thought behind inclusionary zoning, which I'm sure you're aware of. So our desire is not to create more public housing and not to create more concentration of poverty. That's not what is stated throughout the presentation or any of the zoning that we're talking about. We're saying that there should be more diversity. There should be more choices. There should be more places within the city that people, no matter who you are, no matter how long you lived in the city, no matter what your income, that you have a choice to live anywhere you want, because throughout the city, there should be the same opportunity for every child and for every person to be able to access resources, whether it's a great school or whether it's healthcare or whether it's a good grocer. Like, that should be everywhere. It should be, and it shouldn't matter where you are. It shouldn't matter if you're downtown. It shouldn't matter if you're on Bergen. It shouldn't matter if you're in the West Ward. It shouldn't matter where we are. So our conversation around affordable housing is really about how do we create more units that are affordable for residents who live here. And we know that our residents make predominantly about $35,000 for a family of 4. So we know that we must have more housing that's affordable to them. Now, others that have housing already, that's wonderful. We want you to continue to find ways to stay in the city and make that a priority for you as well. But we also know there are those that should and deserve other housing that's higher quality. So part of our whole thought around ADUs, part of our whole thought about inclusionary zoning, part of our discussion around how important affordable housing is in the land use and zoning plan is because of that. It's really to provide more people that choice that not everybody has, because not everybody has the ability to afford the same type of housing unit. So we're not about concentrating poverty. That's not where we are. So that's not where we want to go. But second, on your comment about land use and zoning and the boards, you know, we've heard that. I do think we'll take another look at it because the community voice is extremely important. I know that those that have come to planning board or zoning board meetings, you've seen sometimes the power of your impact on different projects throughout the city by coming to planning or zoning boards or other meetings for that matter. And I think that we were not intentionally removing your voice. It was not intentional. If it came across that way, it was not intentional at all. What we wanted to do was try to make some things more streamlined. And maybe we went one step too far, so we'll take another look at that to make sure that your voice is still in the conversation, because it is primary. I know for the mayor and for the administration and our council that we want to make sure that the community voice comes out first. So I appreciate that. We'll absolutely take a second look at that. You're welcome. Yes, Kim, and then I also know the woman. Yes, okay, you have one too. Thank you. Go ahead, Kim.
So one of the things that I want to say is that there's a lot going on being shuffled, and you know, some of this presentation is disingenuous. There are statements that you're making that are just not true. A lot of us participate in the 360 master plan, but a lot of what is in here is not what we wanted. And how you make certain statements, you know, it's just unfair for you to be making these statements that's inaccurate, and you're acting like you're speaking for the masses of people who spent their time putting real energy into this plan. One of my questions is, warehousing is proposed to be prohibited in I-1, but new micro-fulfillment warehouses, which can be 20,000 square feet, are proposed to be permitted use in MX2, and commercial 3 zones that are in neighborhoods. So you, in one sense, you're sitting up here and saying, oh, but we're not going to have the warehouses. But now you're putting it into our community. We're already dying of asthma and all kind of health impacts. And this is where I'm saying we can't be shuffling things around and then now decreasing our quality of life and then adding to the environmental degradation in this city that we fought hard to get away from. So we need to be truthful in this presentation.
So Kim, I understand that there's a lot of interest in that, but when I said warehousing, I meant people. I didn't mean warehouse development.
Not you.
So I just want to make sure I did not
It
mean
wasn't you.
people.
It was a presentation.
Okay, so I don't know if, I don't recall if you said something around that, but please feel free to respond.
So Kim, warehousing is already allowed in the current ordinance in the MX2 zoning.
Right, you made a presentation. See, this is what I'm saying when you want to twist certain things. And I'm not going to stay in here because I know other people have questions, because we will write the Southward Environmental Alliance, we will correct it. We're going to write and submit what we say because we want to validate this. But you have to stop saying inaccurate statements at this presentation. People are spending 3 hours of their time to come out here. And then you brought up, you know, banquet halls are not permitted. That is not true. Our restaurants are banquet halls. But you don't mention the new liquor stores and bars and massage parlors that we are going to be bombarded with. So, you know, it's selective in what you want to say to make it sound good. But we love our city, and we want our city to be vibrant and healthy. And what you're trying to do is stifle our voice and not let us be a part of what we know this city can look like. That's what I'm talking about.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Yes, sir, in the red. Oh, I'm sorry, the woman here in the gray, and then the gentleman in the red, and the gentleman in the orange. Yes, ma'am.
Hello? Yeah, so I had a question about the ADUs.
Yes.
So are they considered as tiny houses in New Jersey? I know that there's a law against really tiny houses.
So there will be, Pallavi can tell you the standards better, and I know there was a
Okay.
slide on
I'm just
it.
trying to
but-
clear up the standard for what you would consider an ADU.
But it wasn't meant to be size related. So what's the
Oh, it's
minimum
not.
size?
400 square feet. So
Okay,
what's
so are they
allowed?
linked to the water system and the sewage system of the main house? Is that how you're doing it, the electrical? So you're not putting a separate unit with separate utilities on it?
Will be a separate unit or will be attached, like through?
So ADUs can be attached or detached.
So it could be both.
It could be both.
So you have to get utilities and services to that unit?
Yes, because it's a dwelling unit, so it will need all those amenities, right, that a
Right.
typical unit would need. Yes.
Okay.
So think about it like if you wanted to, like an example maybe that you thought of is like, say, for instance, you have a garage that is no longer as needed because you have a driveway and you wanted to change the garage into, do some renovation and make that into an accessory dwelling unit. Well, that would be detached, it could be detached from your house. So that would have like be a separate unit that you'd have to have your separate attachments to get the plumbing and the electric and all of that to be able
So you
to
have it
be
all
usable.
permitted and all
So
that? That
yes,
would have to go
yes,
through
everything
all
would
of
have
that?
to go through permits and be to standards. Yes, yes, absolutely.
So it wouldn't be considered a tiny house then? I mean,
So-
I couldn't buy
so-
it from Home Depot. That's basically
No.
what you're saying, right? Because they have those on the box houses, right? And you could just buy one, put it in your accessory dwelling unit, right?
It's
Is
a great
that-
question. I actually hadn't thought about whether or not you could buy. I like I've seen the same as you. Like I've seen at Home Depot that they are selling them like
Yeah.
at their own tiny house box to build.
Right.
So, but I'll see if Pallavi, do you want to respond?
So what the Home Depot sells is these they're not dwelling units, they are structures, right? That people even now.
I'm not talking about the shelters. I'm
Right.
not talking about
No,
the little
not
storage
shelter.
unit. I'm talking about like HGTV, tiny
Uh-huh.
homes, right?
Okay.
You can buy those online for $20,000-$30,000. So if I bought one and put it on my property, right? That has become another dwelling unit. I can either rent that unit out or keep it, right? That's what you're
Right.
saying.
Right.
And really make it a 2-unit.
Yeah. No, we will look at it. Yes,
Yeah,
we'll
that
look
should
at
be
it.
looked
It's a
at.
good question. Yes, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. Okay, gentleman in the red and then gentleman in the orange.
Zoning ordinance you're going to put before the city council yet? Have you drafted what they're actually going to vote on?
Yes, sir. The microphone's right there if you wouldn't mind.
Have you drafted the resolution to amend the zoning ordinance that you're actually going to put in front of the city council to vote on yet?
So the original proposal, yes, has been drafted. It has not been modified based upon community meetings, so it is not prepared for council at this point because we still are having community meetings.
When will you have the final draft that you'll be putting in front of the city council?
Our goal would be by the end of the month.
And when will you be putting in front of the city council?
Our goal would be by the end of the month or early July.
Don't you think that when you come up with the final document, there should be, say, a 30, 60, 90-day period for people to review it? Because the devil is in the details.
Thank you.
That's not an answer. Are you going to do that, or are you going to draft it and then a few days later just give it to the city council without allowing people to review it meticulously to see whether or not they think, having reviewed it, that it meets the concerns that they have?
I understand your question. At this point, that's why we've been going through this 90-day review
But you haven't
period.
drafted the document yet. The
It's cer-
document will have
so-
a lot of details.
So,
Those details
sir,
need to be
most of the
analyzed.
details are drafted in the 300 draft document that's already available. Any modifications would be related to the conversations we've been having over the last few months.
And those conversations are very important. That's why the changes could be very important, and people should have at least 30 days to review the document. It shouldn't be drafted and then presented to the city council a few days later. It should be.
Appreciate it.
appreciate it, but you're not going to do that, are you? You're just going to...
Thank you. I mean, there's going to be a process that council goes through as well. They have to go through an ordinance review.
This 300-page
so-
document, do you have
Yes.
copies that people can pick up at your office or buy?
No, there's no need to buy it. You're definitely willing to, if you'd like a copy of it, you could let us know and we'd be happy to print one.
Yes.
We'd be happy to print.
Yes, we would. I know a number of people who would like to go and pick that up. Was the same document given to the Central Planning Board and the City Council?
Yes.
So I would like to go to your office. When can I go to your office to pick one up?
You're welcome to come tomorrow.
Tomorrow? What time should I come tomorrow to pick it up?
I would say after 12 o'clock.
I will, and your office is?
You can go to the Planning and Zoning office at room 110. Right?
And is
Oh,
that-
sorry, 112.
So after 12 o'clock?
Yes.
Is there anybody else who would like to pick one up? Well, so maybe you could have half a dozen available to be picked up by people after 12 o'clock.
Sure,
One
we'll
with
have a
my
few
name on it,
copies.
though.
Sorry?
One with my name on it, though.
I'm sorry, sir. What would be your name?
George.
Okay, George, we'll be happy to do that.
All right, thank you.
No problem.
I just want to make a note, if you don't want 320 pages, because I don't, it's online too. Okay, yeah.
Yes, it's been online as well. Yes. Yes, it's if you go to the website that is on this slide, everything is online. But I'm happy to print some copies for people who want to pick it up.
But this is not going to be the final draft that's presented.
It's just the one that's been submitted to council, already to council and central planning board. So a key question that was asked was, is it going to be the version that's available for the next vote for council? The answer is no. It's the version that we've been meeting about for the last 90 days. So if you want the version that's going to council, that's going to be by the end of the month at some point, but that's not going to be that. Yes, sir. We'd be happy to, George.
I just, let me clear it up, okay? Let me just make a little note if I can, Deputy Mayor. So, when this document, if any changes are gonna come forth, which I do expect changes to come forth, this is the reason we have public dialogue, okay? It's not like, oh, this is final, we're here. We're presenting to you what we have thus far. We are on like meeting number 50 of this, of having people give their input, things that your council members, I know there are people from respective wards all through here tonight. Welcome to the Central Ward. We're happy to have you, but many of you have already contacted your council member, your elected official, you sent letters. I've gotten a ton of letters with different, suggestions and wants and asks. I mean, we've gotten it all, but this is not final. This is why we're having this meeting for input. And when they do present, when the administration, the deputy mayor does come back and say, hey, this is what we got out of community meetings, council members have added their input as well, like, hey, this is not going to work for my community here in the north versus the south versus the central, then there will be changes and some amendments that may happen. When those do become available, we plan to advocate, just like we have to have the online availability. If you want to come and pick up 350 pages, that's up to you, but it's online, available to everybody to view. And then it has to go through a process with council, which then allows for public participation again. So you're able to come out to a council meeting, when the final becomes available, to say, no, yes, like it, love it, hate it. You're able to do that. It doesn't just come to council and it's stamped, approved, and it's done. It's a whole process that it goes through. And those who are here, who are familiar with the process for council, you know that it has to go through an introduction period, a first reading, and then also to a second reading. So I invite you to come out to be a part of that as well, because at the end of the day, your voice just shouldn't be here. You should become in front of the people that you elect, including myself, to say, hey, this is why this does not work for me. And you have that availability to you. We're not looking to strike that or fast pace it. We're looking to take it through the regular, normal process. So that will be available to everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Council President. Okay, gentleman in the orange. Oh, here, I'll switch with you, Gerard. And then
Yeah.
there's a gentleman in the black shirt over there.
This is just a simple question. What's the active push like to attract developers and like business people to help to build up some of these things?
Say that one more time.
The active push. What's the active push you guys are doing to attract these developers and such? That's what I want to know.
Sure. So one of the initiatives that Pallavi mentioned was equitable investments in Newark communities. So that's one, the EINC. There's actually Keith Hamilton is the manager of that effort. He actually changed roles in the last 2 months. And so he's strictly running that initiative. That's one. The second is that you can still purchase properties through the city, and you can still purchase properties through the land bank. So you can always buy properties that way. The third part is that there are various incentives for people who already own property. And so we do solicitations for gap funding if you're looking to do affordable housing. We also have tax incentives for development that's typically 50 units or larger. And so, so those are some other ways in which we're working with people who are interested in doing development throughout the city. Gentleman over there. Yes, in the back. Yes. Yes, sir.
In the North Ward meeting, you had mentioned that Victoria Houses and Oriental Village, that those properties are going to be eventually sold off.
Do we mention? I'm not sure, sir. Say that again.
I mentioned public property
Uh-huh.
that was shuttered or partially shuttered.
Oh, I see. The housing authority owned property.
Right.
So, right, sorry.
What's the plan with that land?
So that's still the housing authority owned property. And so the city, we have, the housing authority has a board of directors, and then they have an executive director who works through policies around how they're going to sell their land. So for the city, our role is typically to get them to move faster, to rebuild on vacant property that could be otherwise affordable. But we do not, the city does not determine that. That's really the housing authority. And I'm sorry we don't have a representative here, but they would be the decision maker around that.
But is that the plan to replace what's there?
So again, that would be the housing authority. I don't want to speak for the housing authority. I don't work for them, and I'm not on their board, so I don't feel comfortable being able to answer that question. And I know, Council President, you're also not on their board either, but.
But listen to what the actual question was. I mean, we have been advocating for all Newark Housing Authority properties to be rehabilitated and turned to something other than what they are now. Some of them that have been vacant for years now, but we don't actually know what the physical plan is for Oriental, or I think you mentioned like across the street from Villa Victoria and all of that. That's something that's been vacant for a while, and we're waiting on Housing Authority to make a determination for that. But it is a different entity.
Thanks. Okay, the question here and then a question here. So, Gerard, can you grab the mic right next to you? Thanks. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening, everyone.
Hello.
I am still trying to figure out when we talk about or speak about affordable housing, how a resident in the city of Newark making $35,000 to $45,000 can go into, because with the new development in a market rate building and afford the rent. Even if they could afford the rent, they're paying half of their yearly salary on rent. So are we going to, with this particular Newark 360 plan, are we going to be putting certain criterias in place for for developers when they are building in the city of Newark?
So it's a great question. We agree with you. I'd say, so this is land use and zoning strictly. When it comes to affordability, it often has to be something else, like gap funding or selling city-owned land or a tax incentive or supporting the development at the state level to get funding to do the project. But that wouldn't be just done through land use and zoning. It would be through one of the other components. Second, a key part, though, that is related to land use and zoning is inclusionary zoning. So the fact that the council and the mayor just strengthened the law, and by strengthen we mean made it harder for developers not to do affordable housing. So now you have to do 15 units or more, have to have 20% on-site affordable. And then second, we made it more expensive for someone to buy out of it. In the past, you could buy out of doing inclusionary zoning for about $25,000 a unit. And now we made it more comparable to the actual cost of development, which is about $180,000. So we're trying to work to have more on-site affordable in some of these market rate development, because we were seeing that that wasn't happening. The development community wanted to look at other ways to buy out of it, so in some cases they were able to. But now that's not what we're doing today. Any other, oh, I'm sorry, yes?
Good evening, James Holloway from the historic James Street Commons. I'd like to first camp on to this gentleman's question about the incentives for our neighbors and residents of the city of Newark to be very much involved in filling the density issues that you're trying to abate. I would like to see Keith, you said Keith is going to, that's going to be his purview?
The new effort, yes.
Okay, but he's not going to make up his own rules. He's getting his rules as coming to him directly from the committee that's doing this presentation tonight, and the council that's going to approve it.
Yes, but, oh, sorry. We already have a solicitation out for the sites. They were released, and we did it publicly over the last 30 days. And so it has its own structure behind it, where we're trying to have at least 50% of the units affordable in all of the land sales that we're doing.
Well, now, see, that's the part that I thought it was really nice, one of the best presentations I've seen coming from the city in a long time. Basically, I didn't think this message was coming from the city. I thought it was the predator developers brought it to you. Now you take it and sell it to them. But you've already put out the properties for sale, and I'm thinking that those residents that are renters in those neighborhoods, there should be incentives for those people now to not be renters and be homeowners. Now you're going to make better citizens out of them, especially because you said they're going to be owner occupied. And when a person owns a property, he's going to take care of it. He's going to be a better Newarker.
Agreed. So it does not have to be rental. We're just saying it has to be affordable. So.
But you already put out the properties that you're going to sell. Who'd you send these to? Because again, my name is James Holloway. I didn't get one of those.
Just for one program. So one of the things to say is that we can't do things sequentially. We have to do things simultaneously. So things have to continue. We don't want to be stalled or stagnant. So that's one effort is the equitable investments. Land use and zoning update is another effort. When we put out for a solicitation for new GAP funding, that'll be a third one. But they all are interrelated.
You mentioned the GAP funding. I think that would have been I thought that's really what we were going to do. That's why I wasn't saying anything. Because most people say, we from the historic James Street Commons Neighborhood Association, we're against everything. But we're not against development. We just want the right development. You see? I did have another thought, but I would like to see that what do you call it, an RF?
The equitable investments?
Yes,
Sure.
I'd like to see that.
It's on our website. We'd be happy to try it.
Okay. So who did you send that to? To all the developers that's downtown?
Publicly released, yes. But it's no problem. We'll be happy to send it to you.
Okay, great.
Sure. Thanks. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Found that was really interesting. And that's with regards to what would be considered affordable rents for the lower income families, which was like $700 and some odd a month. And with all of the new development that has taken place over the last decade or so, none of them are even close to being that. Except some of our older homes. And I saw that you said that one of the things would be to preservation finds ways to maintain some of the older housing stock. And I would really say this just really from the standpoint of some of the cooperative housing that is in the city.
we are some of the most affordable housing, and that's without any kinds of subsidies. But we're not getting the kind of support that we need. So I know this is not the forum for that, but I do think that there needs to be a way to shore up some of the affordable units that are presently in Newark that just need some more assistance from the city, such as tax abatement issues, which I know some of them are having some struggles with. But I do hope that there'll be some advertisement or some discussions that we can start having about the preservation end, because we've lost a lot of affordable units. And, you know, I think a lot of those that are presently still around are kind of struggling right now. So we do need to put that as part of the thing. But 700 and something, that is about right. Yeah.
You're right. I mean, I think that the homeownership side, the co-op side, the discussion around older housing stock, we agree we have to continue to have that. We actually have Gerard Crowder here, who's our assistant director. He was the affordable housing manager for about 2.5 years until he got promoted. And so he started with the goals. He's the one who helped craft the goals. And so he's been the champion for it. But with Gerard's promotion, we have just selected a new affordable housing manager who starts in 3 weeks. So we'll definitely be following up. So. Any other comments? Yes, sir. You can be our final comment.
Thank you.
Do you
I just wanted to ask about some of the
green
thinking behind making. Sure.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask about some of the thinking behind making liquor stores legal in more places. Right now, they're only legal in the commercial 3 zones, and it looks like your proposal makes them legal on the commercial 2 zones, which is South Orange Avenue and Clinton Avenue and Springfield. And that seems like something that has caused problems in the past. And then I guess a second similar question is about massage parlors, which have been legal in the mixed use zones and only in commercial 2 and commercial 3 with special conditions. So if someone wanted to break the rules, they had to go to the zoning board. And now they would just be permitted uses. And then a third, a similar question just about the thinking behind it so we can all understand better, is about the single room occupancy boarding houses. Because right now the boarding houses are only allowed, again with conditions, like only 20 tenants in the commercial 2 and commercial 3. And the proposal now has those legal in mixed use 1, mixed use 2, commercial 1, commercial 2, commercial 3, and institutional for the first time. So it just seems like these kinds of issues, these kinds of uses have caused issues. And I also mentioned, because it's the same question about bars and taverns. Right now, those are only permitted in the commercial 2 and commercial 3 zones, again with special conditions like noise proofing. But this makes them permitted uses in mixed use 1, mixed use 2, mixed use 3, commercial 1, commercial 2, commercial 3. So maybe there's just some common thinking behind all those, I guess what we used to call vice uses, becoming just permitted uses all around the city. Thank you.
Thanks. So I don't know about the terminology about vice uses, but I will say this. The thinking is we want to have communities that have the ability to have various different uses in the commercial space in all parts of the neighborhood. So we're happy to talk with you more. I know we have comments that mirror exactly what you said from the South Ward Environmental Commission, so we'll definitely be taking another look at it. So thank you for your comment. Any other questions tonight? If not, I thank you all for sticking with us and coming through all the meetings, those that have, and we'll look forward to getting back to you on where we go from here. But again, please send us your comments through June 16th, and thanks so much for have a good night.